Hello, my name is Jennifer Bernheim, and I'm the founder of Right to Read Advocacy. At Right to Read Advocacy, we empower parents of dyslexic learners through parent coaching, direct advocacy, and valuable educational content like today's webinar. Additionally, we're a membership organization for advocates and related professionals. Today, you'll be hearing from two of our members, Catherine Scholl and Allison Meyerson, as they talk to us about defining dyslexia, a parent's guide. You can learn more about Right to Read Advocacy at righttoreadadvocacy.com. All right, turning it over to my team.
Hi there, I'm Catherine Scholl, and I am an advocate and team member of Right to Read Advocacy. So today's goal is to go over what exactly the meaning of dyslexia is. We've heard this word time and time again, and right now it's definitely in the forefront of reading as science of reading becomes more popular and the identification of students with dyslexia is increasing due to the more knowledge that we have. But a lot of times we hear that word dyslexia as a parent, and we don't really know what it means. So in the most basic term, if we pull the word dyslexia apart into the Greek roots, dys meaning difficult and lexia meaning word. So at the very, very basic meaning of dyslexia, it's word difficulty. But as we know, it's way bigger than just word difficulty. And we wish it was just as simple as those two Greek root meanings. So today we aim to define what dyslexia means and try and put it in layman's terms so parents can understand. So when they hear that word, they just don't think of things like my child can't read or my child reverses letters. So we're going to start with the overarching definition of dyslexia that is pretty much the guiding definition that most educational environments use. And that is put out by the International Dyslexia Association, otherwise known as the IDA. So what is the IDA? The IDA is pretty much the gold standard for information on dyslexia. And they've basically developed this widely accepted definition of what dyslexia is. However, the language can definitely confuse most people, as it confuses me as well. So we're going to try and break this definition down into terms that you can understand. The IDA has been around for many, many years, and its main goal is to promote effective teaching approaches in dyslexia and clinical educational intervention strategies for dyslexic learners. It also focuses on the early identification of dyslexia, and it really commits itself to research-based knowledge. So educators and parents, we look to the IDA for guidance. And so let's take a look at what they say dyslexia is. Dyslexia is a specific learning disorder that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Woo! That is a mouthful. That's a lot going on in that definition. So let's go ahead and take it piece by piece, break it down into smaller chunks to make it more understandable. So the first part states, dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. That in itself is a mouthful. So what does that mean? What is a specific learning disability? So in its simplest terms, it's an impairment of learning ability that may affect one or more academic areas and exists in spite of adequate intelligence and opportunity to learn. Okay, so what does that mean? The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDA, which is the law that governs free and appropriate public education for students with special education, they state that specific learning disability is a disorder of one of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or using language. And It can affect things like thinking, speaking, reading, writing, spelling. It can affect math. This also includes dyslexia. So the specific learning disability is basically a disability that a student has that is not due to a cognitive impairment. And it's happening even though the student is in a proper environment to learn. So they may be at school, they're getting what they're supposed to be getting as far as typical peers, their cognitive profile, they have the ability to learn, but they still have weaknesses in those spelling, writing, reading, math skills. That's what we define as a specific learning disability. So if a child is classified as dyslexic for an IEP for special education, that would be their classification, specific learning disability. Now, state to state, it may look a little different. They may call it specific learning disability / dyslexia. They may including specific learning disability in reading weakness, but it'll always be classified as specific learning disability or SLD. So neurobiological in origin. This is where it gets tricky for a lot of parents and educators as well. Neurobiology is the study of the nervous system and how the brain works. So what does that mean? It means that dyslexia it's wired into the brain from the time the child is born. So this is not something that they catch. It's not something that they acquire throughout the years. They're not born not having dyslexia, and then all of a sudden they have dyslexia. They don't have dyslexia, and then all of a sudden they don't have dyslexia. It really is a part of the brain that is just wired differently. So it doesn't mean that the student's never going to be able to learn, right? It just means that we need to identify it, understand it, and teach them the right way, teach their brain how to work. So that's what this definition, so this, okay. So it is a neurobiologic origin. It is a brain-based disorder. So people with dyslexia have unique structural characteristics, and it's not simply a delayed development of the brain. A lot of kids sometimes when they hear that they're dyslexic or you're trying to uncover if they're dyslexic, they may feel like they'll use that word stupid. Oh, I'm stupid, right? It's very important to explain to them that they are not stupid. Their brain is just functioning differently or not typical of their peers. Okay, so let's move on to the next portion of the definition. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent reading recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. So poor spelling we can understand. We know a child with dyslexia usually has poor spelling. But what does it mean to have accurate and/or fluent word recognition? So by understanding each letter's sounds and how these sounds work together, typical students can quickly figure out what words, they recognize them quickly, they know what they are, and they don't have to spend time sounding them out. For example, a child who knows that the letter B makes the sound B and that the word ball has 3 syllables can break it into B, all, 2 syllables, I'm sorry, 2 syllables, B, all. They can read it quickly and accurately. We call that automaticity. So they see the word, they instantly know it. That we consider accurate and fluent recognition, being able to see a word, read it accurately and fluently quickly. Students who have dyslexia have struggles with that concept. They're not able to do that. And that goes into the next part of it, the spelling and the decoding. They have issues with spelling and decoding the words. So decoding connects how words sound to how those sounds are represented by letters. So what does that mean? It's the ability to turn a written word into the correct spoken word. So they actually see it written and now they can speak it correctly, right? Which is what reading is. For example, when a student sees the word cat in a book or written on paper, they typically can quickly read the word cat. It just happens naturally. These 3 sounds combine to make the word cat. A student who has dyslexia, remember, their brain is wired differently. We already know that it's neurobiological in origin. their brain doesn't work that quickly. It doesn't have the capacity to break it down like that. So we know that the dyslexic learner has weaknesses in accurate and fluid word recognition and spelling and decoding abilities. So the next part of the definition, according to the IDA, International Dyslexia Association, is that these difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Okay, so what does that mean? In my experience, both as a mother of a dyslexic and as a special education teacher for many years, the phonological component is the hardest part to grasp for educators and parents as well. So what does phonological component mean? It's basically the phonological components of language are difficulty pronouncing, remembering, or thinking about individual speech sounds that make up words. So what does that mean to a child with dyslexia? The two components are made up of phonological awareness and phonological and phonemic awareness. If we want to break it down, the word phonological down into the Greek root, we know that phono means sound. So it's basically the sounds that students are hearing and how they're able to process and manipulate it. We know that students with dyslexia have a very challenging time with phonological awareness. Before a child can read, they need to understand that words are made up of individual speech sounds, or what we call phonemes. If they're not able to do that, that is a red flag for dyslexia. So what does that look like? So we have all these big words, but what exactly does phonological awareness means? Examples include identifying words that rhyme, right? So from a time that kids are very little, we're driving in the car with them and we're singing nursery rhymes with them, and they're able to identify that ball rhymes with fall. And you say, okay, tell me a word that rhymes with cookie. Oh, mookie. And you get silly. And we do this in kindergarten. We do this in pre-K, right? This is the foundational skills to reading. If a child has a weakness in being able to rhyme, being able to also recognize an alliteration, right? Big Bobby's ball is blue, right? If a child can't recognize that, because these are all typical skills that we see emerging readers have, that's a red flag for dyslexia. So remember, phonological sound. It's that first foundation of reading skills is being able to recognize the sound and play with the sound. And that's why we do nursery rhymes. That's why you walk into a pre-K room and it's like, they're just playing with the sounds. They may not necessarily have the letters out yet, right? They may not be able to say, oh, A says ah, but they're playing with those sounds. Phonological awareness, the awareness that our language is made up of sounds that then are made up of words, and then are made up of sentences and paragraphs and so on. So phonological awareness also talks about or goes into segmenting a sentence into words, knowing that our sentence is made up of 5 words. It's identifying syllables, right? We always play this game of, clapping out the syllables in your name, right? So my name is Catherine. And, when I used to teach kindergarten, we would go around the classroom in the morning in circle time and clap out our names. And then we'd bring up more words. We're not looking at letters yet. We're just going over the sounds, phonological awareness. Now, phonemic awareness is really it's the highest order of phonological awareness. So now that we know that children can hear the sounds, play with the sounds, rhyme the sounds, children are now asked to demonstrate their phonemic awareness. So, for example, being able to recognize which words in a set of words begins with the same sound. So before we talked about alliteration, right? Big Bobby's blue ball. Now we're saying bell, bike, boy, cat. Which word doesn't have the B sound, right? So now we're kind of digging a little deeper into that phonological processing. And remember, children who cannot hear or manipulate spoken words or phonemes will have a huge difficulty translating them into letters when it's time to put it into the written word. So this is why it's so important to focus on and get early intervention on that phonemic and phonological awareness. We also know, research shows us and tells us that a child's phonological and phonemic awareness skills are excellent predictors of later reading success or difficulty. So if we're identifying a weakness that children can't do rhyming and segmenting and manipulating, it's going to be a predictor of when and how they'll be able to read. So that's a really important fact to remember. This is phonemic awareness and phonological awareness is very different than phonics, right? Phonics is then the next step in where we connect the sounds to print. We then say, okay, we're going to take these sounds that we've been playing with and singing about, and now we're going to put it into print. Then it teaches the letter representations of the sound, what we call the alphabetical principle. So very different. So I hope that I gave you a clearer understanding of what the phonological component is and how important it is into identifying early intervention, early identification of a dyslexic learner. Now, again, we talked about the often unexpected. Dyslexia is often unexpected because we know that the child is very bright. They have the capabilities of learning, but there's something that's holding them back. Even though they're getting great classroom instruction, they're struggling, which goes back to the neurobiological origin of that they're just wired differently. And we can't change that. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension, reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So basically, secondary consequences just mean that students with dyslexia, because they cannot and do not read very much, they're not wired to learn the language easily. And that'll cause other problems, such as learning vocabulary, comprehending the words that they are reading, because they're spending so much time, remember, trying to decode and hear the sound of each letter, that they lose the comprehension by the time they're done reading. And so these second consequences can really be detrimental as the child gets older if they're not getting appropriate instruction. So I'm going to pass it on now to my colleague, Allison Meyerson, who's going to talk about how the definition of dyslexia came about.
Hi, I'm Allison Meyerson. So between the years of 1994 and 2002, dyslexia was defined in very simple terms. The basic premise was that there was difficulty in phonological processing, which caused difficulty in single word decoding, which hence caused difficulty with reading, writing, and spelling. It was a very simple definition, and that was through 2002. However, in 2002, the IDA updated the definition, and now they gave it the complexity that it deserves. So again, the major deficit is from the phonological processing issue. So a child would have difficulty with phonological processing, which would result in difficulty with decoding, spelling, accuracy, and fluency. And those are the primary consequences. However, we now know that there are secondary consequences, and the secondary consequences are difficulty with comprehension and difficulty with a reading experience. If you're not good at reading, you shy away from reading. So you don't have those reading experiences. When you don't have those reading experiences, you don't get to build vocabulary and you don't get to build background knowledge. And that, in turn, negatively impacts comprehension down the road. So it really builds on itself. So we saw that it wasn't just a simple, okay, they're not able to read. No, it goes deeper than this. It's bigger than this. And now Catherine's going to discuss the Connecticut definition of dyslexia, and then I will be back to discuss the New York definition.
So we reviewed really in depth the definition, the general, widely accepted definition from the International Dyslexia Association of what dyslexia is. we discussed how the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, how they define what specific learning disability dyslexia is. And each state can then take that widely accepted definition and make it their own and add in different components. But they all go back to the basic premises of what we talked about. For example, the state of Connecticut, which has a lot of the commonalities between the IDA definition. So they also talk about that it's neurobiological, which we can't deny. It's unexpected and inconsistent with the student's other abilities, right? So that's the commonality there. But the difference between the state of Connecticut's definition and the IDA definition is that they recognize that the strengths of a student, right? Which is also very important, because we don't want to talk about all of the weaknesses that our child has. Let's talk about the strengths that we also see. So they talk about how they have strengths in cognitive abilities in areas such as reasoning, critical thinking, concept formation, problem solving, listening comprehension, right? So they bring a lot of strengths to the table that we certainly cannot avoid, because these strengths are going to come into play with their weaknesses when we're planning out their instruction. So I really do love that Connecticut does that. They also talk about a very important component that a lot of states don't talk about, is that early identification and appropriate instruction targeting the underlying phonological, word reading, and spelling deficits have to be addressed, right? So we cannot minimize the instruction based on what they have. We have to really make sure that we're identifying early and giving an appropriate plan.
Okay, so here we are with New York. Now, New York, while it doesn't mention the early years, it does mention that there are other, that there's other conditions that affect the reading. So what I like is that they say that the reading skills, they qualify it by saying that it's going to be impacted by the phonological processing, the decoding, the fluency, and the spelling. I also like that they mention math in the first paragraph, because that's something that we do see. And so they say that it's a difficulty with listening, thinking, speaking, reading, writing, spelling, and mathematical calculations. But the rest is the same as the IDA.
Great. Well, thank you both. Thank you for joining us for Defining Dyslexia, a Parent's Guide, Part 1. I hope you tune in for Part 2. Again, Jennifer Bernheim, Catherine Scholl, Allison Meyerson with Right to Read Advocacy. You can find more about each of our advocates, their experience, and where they serve, and that is on righttoreadadvocacy.com, and direct email addresses are here. If you have any questions, you can email an advocate or visit us on our website.